The research vessel Endurance drifted through the cold darkness of space, far beyond any territory humanity had ever explored. Lieutenant Ryan Cole stood at the observation window of the ship, watching the distant stars burn like tiny candles against the endless black. He had been in space for nearly 2 years now, and still the view never failed to make him feel small. The mission was simple in theory. Humanity had finally developed a technology to travel beyond the Orion Arm, and the Endurance was tasked with mapping new regions of the galaxy. They were explorers, scientists, and dreamers packed into a metal shell hurtling through the void. Ryan was just a junior officer then, young and eager to prove himself. The distress signal came without warning. It was a series of strange pulses that the ship's computer could not translate. The sound filled the bridge with an eerie rhythm, repeating over and over like a heartbeat slowly dying. Captain Miriam Foster called all senior staff to the command center, and Ryan followed his superior officers with growing unease. "We have located the source," the navigation officer reported. "It is a vessel of unknown design, approximately 200 kilometers from our current position. The ship appears to be heavily damaged and drifting toward the gravitational pull of a nearby star." Captain Foster studied the data on her screen. The alien ship was unlike anything in human records. It was elegant and curved, built from materials that reflected light in strange patterns. But now it was broken, with massive holes torn through its hull and fires burning in several compartments. "Life signs?" the captain asked. "Uncertain. Our sensors are not calibrated for unknown species, but there are heat signatures that suggest survivors." The bridge fell silent. This was the moment humanity had wondered about for centuries. First contact with an alien species. But it was happening in the worst possible way, with a dying ship and no time for careful planning. "Protocol says we should observe and report," the first officer said carefully. "We do not know if these beings are friendly or hostile. We do not even know if we can breathe the same air." Captain Foster nodded slowly. She was a cautious woman, trained to follow rules and minimize risk. But Ryan could see the conflict in her eyes. Somewhere on that burning ship, living beings were dying. "I will go," Ryan heard himself say. Every head on the bridge turned to look at him. He was the youngest officer present, barely 26 years old. But something in his chest demanded action. He could not stand by and watch while people died, even if those people were not human. "Lieutenant Cole, this is not your decision to make," the first officer said sharply. "I know, sir. But someone needs to make it. If there are survivors, they have maybe an hour before that ship falls into the star. By the time we report to Earth and wait for instructions, they will be dead." Captain Foster looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Assemble a volunteer rescue team. Minimal personnel. You have 45 minutes. Ryan moved before she could change her mind. The shuttle crossed the distance quickly, carrying Ryan and 3 other volunteers. They wore heavy environmental suits designed for hostile conditions, but no one really knew what they would find inside the alien vessel. As they approached, Ryan got his first clear look at the damage. Something had torn through the ship with tremendous force, leaving wounds that still glowed with heat. "Docking in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. "I am attaching to what looks like an airlock on the lower section. Good luck in there." The airlock opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere. Ryan stepped into the alien ship and immediately felt the difference. The gravity was lighter here, and the air that leaked through his suit's filters carried a strange scent, like flowers mixed with copper. Emergency lights flickered in patterns he did not understand, casting long shadows down curved corridors. "Stay together," Ryan ordered his team. "Check every compartment. Look for survivors." They moved through the ship like ghosts, stepping over debris and avoiding the fires that still burned in some sections. The bodies they found were tall and thin, with pale skin that seemed almost silver in the dim light. Their hair was white or pale silver, and their closed eyes were large and almond-shaped. They wore flowing garments that might have been beautiful before they were torn and stained. Ryan felt a deep sadness settle over him. These beings had clearly been peaceful. There were no weapons visible, no signs of military equipment. They had been attacked by something, caught helpless and unprepared. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." One of his team members was pointing toward a sealed compartment near the back of the ship. The door was reinforced, designed to withstand exactly this kind of disaster. Ryan approached and found a small window set into the metal. Inside, curled into a corner, was a child. She was young, maybe 8 or 9 years old by human standards. Her silver hair was matted with dust, and her violet eyes stared up at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She clutched a small crystal pendant against her chest, holding it like a protective charm. Ryan did not hesitate. He found the emergency release for the door and pulled it open. The compartment had maintained its atmosphere, but the oxygen levels were dropping fast. The child was already struggling to breathe. He knelt beside her and spoke softly, even though he knew she could not understand his words. "It is okay. I am here to help you. I am going to get you out of here." The child looked at him with those enormous violet eyes. She was trembling, but she did not pull away when he reached for her. Ryan lifted her gently into his arms, surprised by how light she was. She immediately pressed her face against his neck, breathing deeply as if trying to memorize his scent. He felt her small hands grip his suit. "Hold on to me," he whispered. "I will not let anything happen to you." The ship groaned around them. Metal twisted and screamed as the star's gravity pulled harder. Ryan began to run, carrying the child through collapsing corridors while his team covered their retreat. Debris fell around them, and at one point, a section of ceiling gave way. Ryan threw himself over the child, shielding her with his body as metal rained down on his back. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he kept moving. They reached the shuttle just as the alien ship began its final descent toward the star. Ryan collapsed into a seat, still holding the child against his chest. She had lost consciousness, her breathing shallow and weak. He realized with sudden horror that she might not survive, that the oxygen deprivation might have already caused damage. He pulled off his helmet and pressed his mouth over hers, breathing air into her lungs. It was desperate and probably useless, but he had to try. Again and again, he breathed for her, willing her small body to keep fighting. Slowly, impossibly, her chest began to rise and fall on its own. The child's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at Ryan and whispered something in her own language, words he could not understand but somehow felt. Then she pressed her face against his neck one more time and fell into a peaceful sleep. Ryan held her all the way back to the Endurance, refusing to let go even when the medical team tried to take her. Eventually, exhaustion won, and he surrendered her to their care. But he stayed outside the medical bay all night, waiting for news dawn. When the alien rescue fleet arrived 2 days later, they took their people without ceremony. The child was carried away on a stretcher, still clutching her crystal pendant. She turned her head at the last moment and looked at Ryan with those violet eyes. She raised one small hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or might have been a promise. Then she was gone. The mission was classified, the encounter buried in files that no one would ever read. Ryan returned to Earth and tried to forget the burning ship, the silver-haired child, the weight of her in his arms. But sometimes at night, he still dreamed of violet eyes watching him through smoke and fire. He never learned her name. He never knew if she survived, but he never stopped wondering. 8 years had passed since that night on the burning ship. Ryan Cole was no longer a young lieutenant eager to prove himself. He had left the military 3 years ago, tired of the endless paperwork and politics that came with higher rank. Now he worked as chief of maintenance operations on Horizon Gate, humanity's newest and largest space station orbiting Mars. It was honest work. He managed a team of 50 engineers and technicians who kept the station running smoothly. They fixed broken systems, maintained life support, and made sure the thousands of people living on Horizon Gate had air to breathe and water to drink. Ryan found peace in the simple tasks, in solving problems that had clear solutions. The station was buzzing with unusual energy when Ryan arrived for his morning shift. People crowded around display screens in every corridor, whispering excitedly to each other. Something big was happening, but Ryan had been too focused on a coolant leak in Section 7 to pay attention to the news. "Did you hear?" His assistant, a young woman named Katie Park, rushed toward him with wide eyes. "The Velarin are coming here, to Horizon Gate, for diplomatic talks with Earth." Ryan felt a strange chill run through him. The Velarin. He knew that name, though it had never appeared in any public record. It was the species he had encountered 8 years ago, the silver-haired beings with violet eyes, the ones who had taken their survivors and disappeared without a word. "When?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Tomorrow. The whole station is preparing for their arrival. This is going to be the biggest thing in human history. First official contact with an alien species." Ryan nodded slowly. He remembered a small face pressed against his neck, tiny hands gripping his suit. He wondered if that child had survived. He wondered if she ever thought about the human who had carried her from the flames. Probably not. 8 years was a long time. She had likely forgotten everything about that terrible night. The Velarin delegation arrived the next day with a ceremony that stopped all work on the station. Ryan watched from an upper observation deck, far from the crowds of diplomats and officials who gathered to greet their guests. He told himself he was just curious. He told himself it meant nothing. The Velarin were exactly as he remembered them. Tall and graceful, with silver hair that seemed to float even in normal gravity. Their skin was pale, almost glowing, and their large eyes reflected light in shades of violet and blue. They wore flowing robes in colors that shifted as they moved. Like fabric made from captured rainbows. At the center of the delegation stood a regal figure introduced as High Counselor Theron, the Velarin ambassador. He was old by any standard, his face lined with wisdom and his movements slow but dignified. He spoke words of greeting in a voice that carried through the atrium, translated into English by a small device at his throat. But Ryan's attention was caught by someone else. Walking beside the ambassador was a young woman. She was shorter than the other Velarin, with silver hair that flowed past her shoulders and eyes of the deepest violet. She was introduced as Valari, the ambassador's daughter and the cultural liaison for the delegation. Ryan gripped the railing of the observation deck. There was something familiar about her, something that made his heart beat faster. But he could not place it. 8 years had passed, and a child would have grown into an adult in that time. It was impossible to know for certain. He shook his head and returned to work. He had coolant leaks to fix and air filters to replace. Whatever had happened in the past, it was not his concern now. The negotiations proceeded over the following days. Horizon Gate became a maze of diplomats and translators, security guards, and journalists. Ryan moved through the chaos with his maintenance team, fixing problems and staying out of sight. He was just a worker, invisible to the important people making history. But he could not help noticing that Valari seemed distracted. Every time, Ryan spotted the Velarin delegation in a corridor or dining area. Valari was looking around with an expression of intense concentration. Her nostrils would flare slightly, and her head would turn as if searching for something she could not find. Her guards watched her with confusion, but she waved away their concerns. On the 4th day, Ryan was kneeling in a maintenance corridor, repairing a ventilation panel that had come loose during a pressure fluctuation. His tools were spread around him, and he was focused entirely on the delicate work of reconnecting sensor wires. He heard footsteps approaching. The steady rhythm told him it was a large group, probably the diplomatic delegation moving to their next meeting. Ryan kept his head down, not wanting to interfere. The footsteps stopped. Ryan looked up and found Valari standing directly in front of him. Her violet eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted. Her guards were calling after her in alarm, but she ignored them completely. She walked toward Ryan with slow, deliberate steps. When she reached him, she leaned close, so close that he could feel the warmth of her breath. She inhaled deeply near his collar, near the exposed skin of his neck. Ryan froze. He did not understand what was happening. Was this some kind of Velaran greeting? Was he violating some protocol he did not know about? Then Valari spoke, and her words changed everything. "It is you," she said in perfect English, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have searched for your scent across 8 years and 1,000 star systems. You are the human who carried me from death." The corridor fell absolutely silent. Guards stood frozen with their hands on weapons they did not dare to draw. Diplomats stared with open mouths. Ambassador Theron approached slowly, his ancient eyes fixed on Ryan with new intensity. Ryan finally found his voice. "You were just a child. I did not think you would remember." Valari's eyes glistened with tears. "Velaran never forget a scent. Our olfactory memory is absolute. From the moment you lifted me in your arms, I memorized everything about you. The warmth of your body, the sound of your heartbeat, the way you smelled of smoke and something sweet beneath. I would recognize you anywhere, in any crowd, on any world." She reached out and touched his face with trembling fingers. "You whispered to me when I was dying. I did not understand your words, but I understood your meaning. You told me to hold on. You told me I would be safe. You breathed your air into my lungs when I could no longer breathe on my own." Ryan remembered. He remembered the desperate mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, the fear that it would not work on alien physiology. He remembered the weight of her small body in his arms, the way she had pressed her face against his neck. "I did not know if it would help," he admitted quietly. "I just knew I had to try something." Ambassador Theron stepped forward. His expression had transformed from diplomatic neutrality to something deeper, something that looked almost like wonder. "My daughter has spoken of you for 8 years, he said. She described a human who entered a burning ship against all logic, who shielded her with his own body, who gave her his breath when she was suffocating. The healers said she should have died. They said human intervention kept her alive long enough for rescue." Valari nodded, still holding Ryan's face in her hands. "I have dreamed of this moment. I have traveled to every world where humans were rumored to visit. I have searched ports and stations and colonies, always hoping to catch that scent again." Her voice broke. "I never stopped looking for you?" Ryan felt something shift inside him. For 8 years, he had wondered what happened to that child. He had tried to forget her, to bury the memory with all the other classified secrets of his past. But she had not forgotten him. She had searched for him across the stars. "I never knew your name," Ryan said softly. "I am Valari," she replied, "and I have waited 8 years to say 2 words to you." She took a deep breath. "Thank you." The silence in the corridor stretched on for what felt like hours. Ryan stood motionless as Valari held his face in her hands, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Around them, guards and diplomats watched with expressions that ranged from confusion to awe. Ambassador Theron was the first to break the spell. He approached slowly, his ancient eyes studying Ryan with careful attention. There was no hostility in his gaze, only a deep curiosity that seemed to pierce through all pretense. "You are not a diplomat," the ambassador observed. "You wear the uniform of a maintenance worker. You carry tools instead of weapons. Yet my daughter claims you are the human who saved her life." Ryan nodded, uncertain what else to do. "I was a lieutenant in the exploration course 8 years ago. We responded to a distress signal from your ship. I led the rescue team. Against orders, I assume. Not exactly against orders, but not exactly with them either." A ghost of a smile crossed Theron's weathered face. "An honest answer. That is rare among both our species." Valari finally released Ryan's face, but she did not step away. She stayed close to him, as if afraid he might disappear if she let him out of her sight. Her hand found his arm and held on tightly. "Father, this is the one I told you about. Every detail I remembered is true. The way he shielded me with his body when the ceiling collapsed. The way he breathed for me when I could no longer breathe. He saved my life when he had no reason to, when he did not even know what I was." Theron nodded slowly. "I believed you, daughter. But I admit I wondered if your memories were colored by trauma and time. Young minds sometimes create heroes where none existed." He looked at Ryan with newfound respect. "I see now that you did not exaggerate." "I was just doing what anyone would do," Ryan said, feeling uncomfortable with the attention. "No," Theron replied firmly. "You were not. Your own records, which we obtained before agreeing to these diplomatic talks, classified our species as unknown and potentially hostile. Your protocols demanded caution and distance. Yet you entered a burning ship to save beings you had never seen before, risking your life for strangers who might have been your enemies." Ryan did not know how to respond. He had never thought of his actions as heroic. He had simply seen people dying and decided he could not stand by and watch. "May I ask a question?" he said finally. "Of course." "The attack on your ship. What happened? Who did that to you?" A shadow passed over Theron's face. Valari's grip on Ryan's arm tightened. "We were returning from a research mission," Valari said quietly. "Our ship carried scientists and their families. We had no weapons, no defenses. A hostile species found us and decided to take what we had discovered. When we refused to surrender our research, they opened fire. Pirates," Theron added bitterly. "Creatures who prey on the weak and call it strength. They killed most of our people in minutes. Only a few survived by reaching the sealed compartments." He paused. "My wife was not among them." Understanding dawned in Ryan's mind. Valari had lost her mother in that attack. She had been a child, alone and terrified, watching her world burn around her. And then a strange being in a heavy suit had appeared, lifted her in his arms, and carried her to safety. No wonder she had never forgotten. "I am sorry," Ryan said, "for your loss. For all of it." Valari shook her head. "You gave me a gift that night. Not just my life, but hope. I grew up knowing that there was kindness in the universe, that not all strangers are enemies. When others of my species argued that we should avoid contact with humanity, I told them about you. I told them that humans are capable of extraordinary compassion." The diplomatic situation had clearly shifted. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the station, and within hours, Ryan found himself summoned to a meeting room filled with important people. Station Commander Linda Price sat at the head of the table, flanked by ambassadors and advisors from a dozen Earth nations. Theron sat on the opposite side, with Valari beside him. When Ryan entered, Valari's face lit up with a smile that seemed to brighten the entire room. "Please sit," Commander Price said, gesturing to a chair. "Ambassador Theron has made an unusual request, and it concerns you." Ryan sat down nervously. He was a maintenance worker, not a diplomat. He had no idea what he was supposed to say or do in a room full of such powerful people. "When we agreed to these talks," Theron began, "we did so with caution. Humanity is a young species, and our observations have shown that you are capable of great violence. Your history is filled with wars, genocides, and cruelty on a scale that disturbed many members of our council. The human diplomats shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly not the polite diplomatic language they were used to. However, Theron continued, my daughter's experience has given us reason to reconsider. Your species is not simply violent. You are complex. Individual humans display remarkable selflessness, often in direct contradiction to their own survival instincts. You run into danger for strangers. You sacrifice yourselves for beings you have never met. He turned to look at Ryan directly. We would like to understand this aspect of humanity better. And we believe the best way to do so is to have someone who embodies these qualities join our diplomatic discussions. Not as a negotiator, but as an example. A reminder of why we are here and what we hope to achieve. Commander Price raised an eyebrow. You want a maintenance worker to join the most important diplomatic talks in human history? I want the man who saved my daughter to help us understand his species, Theron replied calmly. His rank and title are irrelevant. What matters is his character. Ryan felt all eyes turned to him. He wanted to refuse, to explain that he was not qualified for this kind of responsibility. But Valari was looking at him with such hope, such trust, that he could not find the words. I do not know anything about diplomacy, he admitted. That is precisely why we want you, Valari said. Diplomats say what they think we want to hear. You will say what is true. And so Ryan found himself pulled into a world he had never imagined. He sat in meetings where the future of two species was discussed. He answered questions about human nature, human history, human hopes and fears. He tried to be honest, even when honesty was uncomfortable. The Valoran were particularly interested in humanity's darker chapters. They asked about wars and conquests, about slavery and oppression. Ryan did not try to hide or excuse these things. He spoke of them openly, acknowledging the shame and the pain. We have done terrible things, he said during one session. But we have also fought against those who do terrible things. Every generation, we try to be better than the one before. We do not always succeed, but we never stop trying. Theron listened to everything with careful attention. And slowly, over the days that followed, his expression began to change. The caution in his eyes was replaced by something that looked almost like hope. You are honest about your flaws, he observed one evening. You do not pretend to be perfect. That is either profound foolishness or profound wisdom. Ryan smiled. Maybe both. Theron nodded slowly. Maybe both indeed. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Ryan had ever experienced. He spent his days moving between two worlds, fixing broken systems in the morning and discussing the future of humanity in the afternoon. His maintenance team learned to manage without him for long stretches, and Commander Price officially reassigned him as a liaison to the Valoran. Delegation.VLAR. I insisted on his presence at nearly every meeting. She claimed it was because he helped bridge the gap between their cultures, translating not just words, but the emotions beneath them. But Ryan suspected there was more to it. After 8 years of searching, she seemed reluctant to let him out of her sight. They began spending time together outside of official functions. Valari wanted to understand humanity, and Ryan was happy to teach her. They walked through the crowded corridors of Horizon Gate, observing the thousands of humans who lived and worked on the station. Valari asked endless questions about everything she saw. Why do they argue so loudly? She asked one day, watching two vendors shouting at each other in the marketplace. They are negotiating a price, Ryan explained. It is how trade works here. Both sides pretend to be angry until they find a number they both accept. But they are not actually angry? Not really. Watch their eyes. They are enjoying this. Valari studied the vendors carefully. Sure enough, beneath the loud voices and dramatic gestures, there was a spark of amusement in their expressions. When they finally agreed on a price, They shook hands and smiled at each other like old friends. "Your species is confusing," Valari admitted. "You say one thing, but mean another. You fight with people you like. You hide your true feelings behind layers of performance." Ryan laughed. "I cannot argue with that. We confuse ourselves most of the time. Yet you are also capable of complete honesty in the moments that matter most. When you found me in that burning ship, you did not hesitate. You did not calculate risks or consider consequences. You simply acted from your heart. That is different. That was not about thinking. It was about doing what felt right." Valari nodded slowly. "That is what fascinates us about your species. You are chaos, but there is a pattern within the chaos. When pushed to your limits, most humans choose compassion over cruelty. You help strangers, even when it costs you everything." They had reached a quiet observation deck overlooking Mars. The red planet turned slowly below them, ancient and patient. Ryan leaned against the railing and watched the dust storm swirl across the surface. "Not all of us are good," he said quietly. "We have people who hurt others for pleasure. People who take what they want without caring about the damage they cause. Your species suffered because of creatures like that. The ones who attacked our ship were not human," Valari reminded him. "No, but we have our own versions of them. Every species probably does. The question is whether the good ones outnumber the bad ones." Valari moved to stand beside him. "In my experience, they do. At least among humans." Ryan turned to look at her. In the soft light of the observation deck, her silver hair seemed to glow, and her violet eyes held depths he could not begin to understand. "You barely know us," he said. "You met one human who happened to be in the right place at the right time. That does not make us all heroes." "You are wrong," Valari replied firmly. "It is not just you. In the 8 years since that night, I have studied your species from afar. I have read your histories, watched your broadcasts, analyzed your art and literature. Do you know what I found?" Ryan shook his head. "Stories," Valari said. "Thousands of stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Your culture is obsessed with heroes who sacrifice themselves for others. Your greatest tales are about individuals who stand against evil even when the odds are impossible. This is not an accident. It reveals what you value, what you aspire to be." She took his hand in hers. Her skin was cool and smooth, different from human skin, but not unpleasant. You do not see it because you live inside it. But from the outside, humanity is remarkable. You fight wars against each other, yes, but you also fight wars against your own nature. Every day, millions of humans make small choices to be kind instead of cruel. That takes tremendous effort, and you do it without even thinking about it." Ryan did not know how to respond. He had never thought of humanity in such positive terms. Growing up, he had been taught to see the darkness in his species, to acknowledge the atrocities and injustices that marked human history. "We are not that special," he said finally. Valari smiled. "That is exactly what makes you special. You do not recognize your own worth." Meanwhile, the diplomatic talks had reached a critical point. Ambassador Theron had requested access to humanity's complete historical records. Not the edited versions prepared for first contact, but everything. The wars, the genocides, the worst moments of human civilization. Many advisors argued against this. They wanted to present humanity in the best possible light, to hide the shame and focus on the achievements. But Ryan spoke up during the debate. "If we lie to them, they will eventually find out. And then they will never trust us again. Better to be honest from the start, even if the truth is ugly." Commander Price considered his words carefully. In the end, she agreed. The Velaran received everything. Every dark chapter of human history lay bare for their examination. For 3 days, The Valoran delegation studied the records in silence. The human side waited nervously, fearing that the revelations would end any hope of alliance. Ryan found himself unable to sleep, wondering if his advice had destroyed humanity's greatest opportunity. On the fourth day, Theron called a meeting. The ambassador's face was unreadable as he addressed the assembled humans. Valari sat beside him, her expression equally mysterious. "We have reviewed your history," Theron began. "Every war, every cruelty, every failure of your species to live up to its potential. There is much that disturbs us, much that makes us question whether an alliance with humanity is wise." The human diplomats held their breath. However, Theron continued, "We have also observed something remarkable. You did not hide your shame from us. You did not pretend to be something you are not. You showed us your darkest moments alongside your brightest ones." He stood slowly, his ancient form straightening with dignity. The Valoran have observed many species across the galaxy. Some hide their flaws behind walls of secrecy. Others deny their failures entirely. But you have chosen honesty, even when honesty risks everything you hope to gain. Theron looked directly at Ryan. "A maintenance worker taught us that humans are capable of selfless courage. Your historical records teach us that this courage exists throughout your species, in every generation, in every culture. You are not perfect, but you are honest about your imperfections and still strive to overcome them." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The Valoran High Council has voted. We will pursue full alliance with humanity, not because you are without flaw, but because you have shown us who you truly are. That is the foundation of trust." The room erupted in quiet celebration. Diplomats shook hands and embraced. Commander Price allowed herself a rare smile. But Ryan's eyes were fixed on Valari, who was looking back at him with an expression that needed no translation. They had done it, not through politics or clever negotiations, but through something far simpler. They had told the truth. The treaty signing ceremony was set for the end of the month. Representatives from every major Earth nation were traveling to Horizon Gate, along with delegates from the Mars Colonial Authority and the Outer Planet settlements. It would be the largest gathering in human history, witnessed by billions across the solar system. Ryan watched the preparations from a quiet corner of the station, feeling increasingly out of place. His role in the diplomatic process had been unexpected, almost accidental. Now that the real work was about to begin, he assumed he would fade back into the background where he belonged. Valari found him in his usual spot on the observation deck, staring at the stars. "You are avoiding me," she said, taking a seat beside him. "I am giving you space. You have important things to do. Official ceremonies, formal agreements, the future of two species. I am just a maintenance worker who got lucky." Valari shook her head firmly. "You are the reason any of this is happening. Without you, I would have died in that ship. Without me, my father would never have agreed to these talks. He was ready to recommend isolation for another century. Your father seems like a reasonable person. He would have come around eventually. Perhaps. But eventually might have been too late. The galaxy is changing, Ryan. There are forces moving in the darkness that even the Valoran fear. We cannot afford to stand alone, and neither can humanity." This was the first Ryan had heard of any greater threat. He turned to look at Valari with concern. "What forces?" Valari hesitated. "That is not my story to tell. In time, if our alliance grows strong enough, we will share everything we know. For now, just understand that your species and mine need each other more than either realizes." She reached up and touched the crystal pendant at her throat, the same one she had clutched as a child. "I want to ask you something. Before the ceremony tomorrow. It is important." Ryan nodded. "Of course. Anything." Among the Valoran, there is an ancient tradition called the binding of spirits. When one person saves another's life, a connection is formed between them. It is invisible but real, a thread that links their fates together. The binding is a ceremony that acknowledges this connection, makes it formal and recognized by both families. She looked into his eyes with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. It is not marriage in the human sense. It is not even quite friendship. It is something in between, a bond of mutual care and responsibility that lasts until death. Those who are bound promise to support each other, to be there in times of need, to never forget what they mean to each other. Ryan listened carefully, trying to understand the weight of what she was describing. You want to perform this ceremony with me? I have wanted this since the moment you pulled me from the fire. I was too young then, and we were separated before I could ask. But now, she took his hands in hers. Now, I am asking. Will you accept the binding? Will you let me honor the debt I can never truly repay? Ryan was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his life, the years of loneliness and drifting that had followed his departure from the military. He thought about the strange emptiness he had carried without understanding its source. And he thought about how that emptiness had begun to fill from the moment Valari recognized his scent in the corridor. There is no debt, he said finally. You do not owe me anything. What I did that night, I would do again for anyone. It was not about expecting something in return. Valari smiled softly. I know. That is exactly why you deserve to be honored for it. But if you do not want the binding, I will understand. That is not what I said. Ryan squeezed her hands gently. I would be honored to accept. Not because you owe me, but because you are already family. You have since that night, even though I never knew your name. The ceremony took place the next morning, before the official treaty signing. It was held in a small meditation chamber, with only a handful of witnesses present. Ambassador Theron stood beside his daughter, his ancient face softened by emotion. Commander Price represented humanity, looking slightly uncomfortable in formal clothing, but deeply moved by the occasion. Galari spoke words in her own language, a beautiful flow of sounds that Ryan could not understand but somehow felt. Then she translated for the human witnesses. I acknowledge the bond between us. I recognize that your life and mine are forever connected. I promise to stand beside you in times of darkness, to celebrate with you in times of joy, to never forget what you have done for me or what you mean to me. This promise I make freely, without obligation or expectation. This promise I will keep until the stars themselves grow cold. She removed a crystal pendant from her neck and placed it around Ryan's. This belonged to my mother. She gave it to me on the day I was born and told me to give it to someone worthy of my complete trust. I have waited my whole life to find such a person. Now I have found him. Ryan felt the weight of the crystal against his chest. It was warm, almost alive, pulsing with a faint energy he did not understand. I do not know your customs, he admitted. I do not have traditional words to speak. Then speak from your heart. That is all that matters. Ryan took a deep breath. I remember the night I found you. I remember the fear in your eyes and the way it disappeared when I held you. I remember thinking that no matter what happened, I would not let you die. And I remember wondering, for 8 years afterward, if you were okay. He reached out and touched her face gently. I promise to be worthy of your trust. I promise to support you in whatever challenges come. And I promise to never forget the connection between us, no matter how many years or light years separate us. You are my family now. That is not a word I use lightly. Valari leaned forward and touched her forehead to his in the Valoran gesture of deep trust. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. It is done, she said simply. We are bound. The treaty signing ceremony that afternoon was everything the diplomats had hoped for. Speeches were made, documents were signed, hands were shaken. The alliance between humanity and the Velaran became official, witnessed by the entire solar system. But for Ryan, the ceremony that mattered had already happened. As he stood in the grand atrium, watching history unfold around him, he felt the crystal pendant warm against his chest. Valari stood beside him, her hand finding his in the crowd. She did not look at him, but she did not need to. They were bound now, connected in a way that transcended words. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through strength or cleverness, but through simple kindness. A single act of compassion, offered without thought of reward, had rippled outward through years and light. Years to change the fate of two species. Ryan Cole had gone into a burning ship to save a child. He had not known that he was saving the future. He had not known that his scent would be remembered across the galaxy. He had simply seen someone who needed help and offered it. That was the truth about humanity that the Velaran had recognized. Not that humans were perfect, but that they were capable of being good. Given the choice between cruelty and kindness, most humans chose kindness. And in a universe full of darkness, that choice mattered. Standing beside Valari as the crowd celebrated around them, Ryan understood something he had never grasped before. Every life touched another. Every act of compassion created ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could see. The rescue he had almost forgotten had become the foundation of an alliance that would protect both species for generations. And somewhere in his quarters, on a shelf, beside photographs of family and friends, a small crystal pendant caught the starlight. A promise kept and a future born from a single moment of courage. The stars were no longer cold and empty. They were filled with possibility. And Ryan Cole, the maintenance worker who had become something more, was ready to face whatever came next.